Alrighty folks, you've waited to hear me talk about this. Everybody on YouTube rushed out and immediately made a video on this, and to be honest, a lot of them weren't very good. But you wanted to hear what King Yam had to say about the Kawasaki ZX-4R. My biggest takeaway is, can you believe that Kawasaki is actually going to make this motorcycle and bring it to the States? It feels like a dream come true, doesn't it? It's the most enthusiast of enthusiast motorcycles I can possibly think of in the last 10, maybe even 15 years that I've seen come out. I don't think anyone actually thought this would be released. It was always a bit of a pipe dream. There was the ZX-25 out in Indonesia that was kind of this forbidden fruit. But we're actually gonna get this bike. And as cool as it is, it's not perfect, and there are several things I want to point out in this video that I've taken the time to actually discover from looking much closer at the ZX-4R and being a very dedicated sport bike guy. This is my realm, this is my area, so I'm going to give you guys some ins and outs on the Kawasaki ZX-4R today. Let's get into it. So I've got some specs on my phone here, not Rain Man, can't remember everything. So let's talk about the star of the show, the 399cc inline 4-cylinder engine on this new ZX-4R. Very, very cool, the Kawasaki. Let's just get a little claps for the Kawasaki boys. That is a very cool engine. Red lines at 16,000 RPM. Wow, Yamaha R6, eat your heart out. Little tiny pistons moving very quickly, very fast, all in a nice little configuration there in the engine, making 26.5 foot-pounds of torque at 11,000 RPM. Keep that figure in mind. We're gonna be talking about the torque today in the video. Making 77 horsepower without the ram air effect and 80 horsepower with the ram air. Now, I've seen lots of videos on YouTube where people didn't seem to understand what ram air was. They think that it makes more power because the engine's spinning faster. It's not how it works. Ram air works because the motorcycle's moving through time and space and air is being rammed into it through that nice little intake in the front. So if you've seen any videos of people talking about, you know, the engine speed going up, that's not how that works. Anyways, this means that the engine will need to be zoinked out to make power, but the big difference is you won't be going warp speeds when you actually wring the thing out. That's the big difference in a motorcycle making 80 horsepower versus 128 horsepower. It's literally down about a third of power on something like an R6 or a ZX-6R. But the big thing I want to talk about that nobody seems to be mentioning on YouTube is what is the gearing going to be like on this motorcycle. Nobody's mentioned how it may actually take 2 to 3 gears to get to 80 miles per hour as opposed to 1 to 2 gears that it takes on a super bike or a Super Sport 600. I think the gearing is going to be really, really key to understand this motorcycle's character, especially with the way this motor is making power. Because this inline 4 is the antithesis of the new parallel twin 650 torque first thing that everybody and their mother is doing nowadays. I think it's really cool for Kawasaki to just give a big FU to everybody and give us a super high revving motorcycle as opposed to a super torque first parallel twin. And the thing is, you're gonna have to rev the bike out to get the power. Yeah, it makes 26.5 foot-pounds of torque, but it makes 80 horsepower. And if you keep it on the boil, it is gonna feel pretty quick. I mean, an SV650 makes about 75 horsepower, and yes, it makes about 50 foot-pounds of torque, and so down low it feels nice and punchy, but you have to ride these motorcycles differently. You can't expect a 399cc inline 4 to produce power like a big V-twin. It's just not gonna work out that way. And if the bike is geared appropriately, you're actually gonna get a pretty zesty little bit of acceleration out of it, and it'll feel really fun while you're doing it too. Something nobody has mentioned on YouTube, which I thought was really surprising, but also doesn't surprise me because a lot of people on YouTube have no idea what they're talking about, is that the bike is gonna have sweet dick all in terms of inertia from the crank. Now, I've ridden lots of super bikes on track and lots of 600s on track, and the thing that always shocks me is even though the bike's way similar, the feeling of side to side is super different on a 600 than a 1000 because of the inertia of the crank and how big the engine is. On a big 1000cc motorcycle, you can actually feel that bigger gyro is moving more and causing it to resist turning more. Whereas a 600 just feels so nimble because you don't have as much inertia. And I think a 399cc inline 4 revving to 16,000 RPM is going to feel like you're basically freewheeling the thing. It's going to feel amazing side to side because it's going to have virtually no inertia from the crank. So that's something that not a lot of people have talked about. That's a huge selling point for this motorcycle. You're getting 80 horsepower out of 400-ish cc's. So it's going to go like stink, and it's going to handle super agile because the motor is actually pretty small. Despite having a 415-pound curb weight, wet and ready to ride, I think this bike is still going to feel extremely agile side to side. So here's the question everybody wants me to answer. Is the ZX-4R a beginner bike? Yes and no, right? In the same way that an R7 is a beginner bike or an SV650 is a beginner bike, I think the ZX-4 can be somebody's beginner bike, especially because it takes a lot to get it to actually produce a lot of power. You have to really commit for it to make a lot of power. And because of that relatively low torque figure, it's not going to feel very intimidating, whereas something like an R7 or an SV650, when you whack the throttle, it really goes forward quite a bit, which can be a little scary for beginner riders. So I think the ZX-4R could be piloted by beginner riders, but it's going to be that kind of beginner plus category, edging into the intermediate category like we like to talk about here on Yami Noob. So another thing that hardly anybody on YouTube is talking about, because I don't think they have any idea what they're talking about, is the frame on this motorcycle, right? So the bike is kind of splitting the difference between a Ninja 400 steel tubular frame and something like an aluminum twin spar frame that you'd find in a superbike. If you look at a photo of the ZX-4R, you see that the bottom half kind of looks like a superbike. And then you get up towards the top and it has the steel tubular frame. So it's kind of like this weird hybrid between a Ninja 400 and a ZX6 frame. Now the one thing I really wish they had done on this was actually bolted on a subframe, but you can see that the subframe is welded on, which is a little bit sad. That means that if the bike goes down on track or something like that, if the subframe is compromised, well, there's really no subframe. If the frame at the back is compromised on this motorcycle, it means that the bike itself might be a total loss. You can't replace the subframe because there is no subframe. You'd have to replace the entire frame if it gets bent and twisted out of shape. Not good. So the elephant in the room for the ZX-4 is the price. $96.99 is going to get it done for this bike MSRP. You're probably looking at close to $11,000 out the door at your local dealership if they don't decide to hike it up, because I guarantee you the demand is going to be out of control for these bikes. Now, that is a lot of money for 80 horsepower and 400cc, and a lot of shrimp-brained, small-brained, monkey-brained squids are not going to understand the value proposition. They're going to say, wow, you spent over $10,000 on a 400, you're an idiot, I'm so smart, I started an R6 as my first bike. Great. Here's the thing, the ZX-4R is kind of a novelty motorcycle. It's a brand new frame, brand new engine. It's not like something like the R7 where Yamaha has had all the R&D already bought and paid for basically from the MT-07's engine and frame, and they turned it into a sport bike. It's a brand new motorcycle from Kawasaki. They have to recoup the cost somehow. But it is kind of difficult to make the case for the bike when for $1,000 MSRP more, you can get a ZX-6R because they've been making those for forever. So those who want to walk the ZX-4R line are kind of committing themselves to this cult classic, cult motorcycle thing, and they want to pay into it accordingly. Quick interruption for today's video. It is proudly supported by Rockform. You guys have probably heard us talking about Rockform on the channel before, and that is for a good reason. They are the best in class and the best phone case and handlebar mounting solution for your motorcycle. But it doesn't really end there. Getting a Rockform phone mount means access to the entire Rockform ecosystem. That means you can put this phone as a magnetic surface on your fridge or on your workbench while you're working on your motorcycle, accessing some cool tutorials or something like that. The entire Rockform ecosystem becomes open to you once you have this phone case over here. Fans of the game get 25% off by hitting the link down below or using the code YN25 at checkout. Make sure you check out Rockform because they've been proudly supporting our channel for over 3 years now, and we love what they do. If you want the best-in-class solution for a phone mount on your motorcycle, look no further than Rockform. Now let's get back into the video. I would personally love to see a base model ZX-4. I don't want a double R with the up and down quick shifter, electronic display, slipper clutch, all the crazy doodads. TC, which is really funny on a bike with 80 horsepower. I think this is the traction control, if I remember correctly, with 80 horsepower. But yeah, a base ZX-4 for around $84.99 would make a lot of sense in my opinion. I would love to see that from Kawasaki, but who knows? We'll see. One thing that a lot of people aren't talking about on YouTube either are the tire sizes. This bike does feature a bit of a strange, kind of more SV650-esque tire size, where it has a 160/60/17 out back that is different from the 180/55/17s you would see on a normal traditional Super Sport Plus motorcycle. The R7, for example, has a 180/55/17, making it much more easier to find super high spec tires for it. Kind of a strange decision on Kawasaki's part, but at the same time, a 400cc bike with a 180 rear section tire also doesn't really make sense. So finding rubber might be a little challenging. It's not as easy as the 180/55s, but you should still be able to find some good options for you. So one gripe I do have with the ZX-4 is it's going to ship with non-adjustable front suspension. It has preload adjustable only front suspension and preload adjustable only rear suspension. Now for almost $10,000, I think it's kind of inexcusable to ship the bike without some clickers in the front. Look, I'm not asking for Super's top spec suspension, but even this KTM RC390 over here has adjustable suspension up at the front. And this is an honest to God beginner bike that costs less than $6,500. So kind of missing the mark there, Kawasaki, shipping this bike out with 37mm non-adjustable front forks. And yeah, track day junkies will swap out forks, but that's a big added expense for a bike that should already have those things. I would have preferred to see that instead of a up and down quick shifter. I don't think the bike needed that at all. A big thing as well is the rear shock is not a linkage system. So it's not the traditional linkage system that has a little triangle down there and has a suspension linking down to the bottom and then the actual frame. It's mounted right on the swing arm from what I can tell, kind of similar to the RS660 style. And that's not that bad. It just limits your options for other types of suspension and shock units out back that utilize the linkage type suspension. Again, the RS660 is a fantastic handling motorcycle with a non-linkage suspension out back, but it's just going to limit the type of shocks you can put out in the back. I would have loved to have seen this bike with a linkage suspension, but you know, you can't have everything in the world. So track day and racing commentary on this bike. It doesn't really fit into any categories if you want to go race it. You can't run it in Twins Cup or that kind of category. You can't really run it in the lightweight category with the RC390 or the Ninja 400s. You basically have to run this bike kind of gimped up in another class and then hope that you're the best rider out there, which for club racing, you're probably not going to be. You need every advantage you can have to actually be on a competitive bike in that category. Now, again, there's plenty of races that I've done, for example, that have my Daytona and a ZX-10 all on the same track. You're able to run certain bikes on the same track at the same time, but this is a really oddball motorcycle that not many people have had a 399cc four-cylinder to try to go in racing with. So I don't know what the racing situation is going to look like with this bike. So to me right now, it looks much more like a track day toy type of thing, which, hey, that's cool. It could be someone's learning tool. It can be a fun track day tool, that sort of thing. So where does the ZX-4R kind of sit in the world with its competitors? I think the most natural competitor is from Team Blue, the R7. It comes in at $8,999, but it's a very different sort of motorcycle. The R7 is basically an MT-07 that they turned into a sport bike, and they did a really good job with it. We had a giveaway R7 back in 2021. I have lots of experience with that bike. Really enjoyed it, really had a good time with it. Pretty good on track, really handles very well. It's the sport bike that most people would want or need. It makes great torque, makes a great sound, but it doesn't have the super sport je ne sais quoi. It just doesn't. When you come off an R6, a ZX6, screaming inline 4, it is a totally different vibe than the R7. But that doesn't mean the R7 is a bad bike. So to cross-shop the ZX4 and R7, not exactly a fair comparison in my opinion. The R7's cheaper as well too, which is crazy. So you get more torque for cheaper. But again, Yamaha's already paid for all those R&D costs. The next competitor is obviously the RS660. So that bike costs $11,499 MSRP, so much more expensive. It's much more exotic and sophisticated and all the fancy features, and it's got the parallel twin that revs super high and makes like 100 horsepower, so it's making more power, more torque. It's more exotic. It's odd to make the case that you're cross-shopping these two bikes, but I could see somebody kind of trying to decide whether they want one bizarre sporty bike or another bizarre sporty bike. Both of them don't really fit anywhere. And it's so funny because now we've done away with the 600 Super Sport, and now we're just trying to find these new niches. Is it a super high revving parallel twin? Is it a 400cc inline 4? I don't know. You know, Kawasaki just kind of yeets these bikes out there sometimes, like they did with the H2 in 2015, and everyone's like, oh my God, are we gonna see everybody going forced induction? And no. Nobody went forced induction. Kawasaki sits on their own little island with their forced induction motorcycles, and I think the ZX-4R is going to be kind of the same. Nobody's really going to follow suit and make a bespoke 400cc inline 4 to match what they've done. Highly doubt it. Highly, highly doubt it. But the RS660, a little more expensive, about $2,000 more. I think it can be a competitor, but yeah, it's a little bit more pricey. The obvious comparison is the ZX-6R. I mean, that bike is only $1,000 more than the ZX-4 at $10,699 for the 6R. And yeah, it's kind of hard to go into a Kawasaki dealership and look at both bikes from a kind of more normal consumer perspective and think, gee, I can have the 4R or the 6R for $1,000 more. I'm gonna get 48 more horsepower, something like, you know, 35 foot-pounds of torque more, whatever it is, and it looks the same. It can be kind of difficult to say one way or the other which one you would want. But I do think that, you know, the ZX-4R is a unique value proposition. Lighter crank, lighter weight, more fun to ride. You can really rev it out. More streetable. The ZX-6R is that kind of race prep, track prep, dedicated, like super sport thing. But it's really close in price. I honestly think that Kawasaki made the ZX-4R just to get more people in the door to buy 6Rs. Maybe they're trying to make a resurgence for the 600 class. I don't know. Who can say? And the last competitor I want to talk about is the Honda CBR 650R, which is weirdly enough one of the closest competitors I can think of. It's fully fared, $9,699, so exactly the same price. Makes a little bit less power than a 600. It's a little more street oriented, but the way it goes about its business is totally different. It's got a bigger engine. It's bigger, fatter, more ponderous. The ZX-4R is that really lightweight, nimble, super agile little sport bike, and the CBR 650R is just your classic kind of street bop around bike, you know, that sort of thing. The last point I wanted to make in today's video that not many people are talking about with the ZX-4R are the ergonomics package. If you look at this bike side to side with the ZX-6, you can see that it is almost as aggressive. The seat scoops down a little bit more and the handlebars are up a little bit higher. So it's doing the same trick that the R7 is doing in that it is not exactly a super sport seating position. It is like almost there, which lends credence to the fact that they are thinking about the street rider first. So guys, those are my thoughts and opinions on the Kawasaki ZX-4RR. Let me know down below what you think about this bike. I had to wait to make this video because I saw a bunch of garbage on YouTube with people who had no idea what they were talking about making videos, and your Papa Yam had to sit down here on the throne and talk on high about the ZX-4R. Thanks so much for watching today's video. Remember, Ram Air is not with engine speed. Oh my goodness, so many people got that wrong. Ram Air is when the bike is moving through time and space. We'll catch you guys in the next one. See you later.